Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Seeing Red unofficial Arsenal podcast, where every week I'm your host, Tom Canton, reporter at football.london and The Mirror, and I'm joined every week by chief football writer at The Mirror, John Cross. How you doing, mate? You good, Joel?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good. Yeah. Interesting game at the Bridge. Nice to see you too. It's a good game. Really good game, by the way.
It was a really good game. It was. And listeners, don't worry, we're going to get on to Chelsea very shortly because we feel like it is the main event of a week, which has been pretty positive overall for Arsenal. I think, we reconvened after the Spurs game, feeling pretty good after the North London derby win. And we felt that if Arsenal got 2 wins and a draw from this week, we'd feel pretty good. They've got that. I just don't think it's necessarily in the order of the results they might have perhaps preferred. And that draw against Bayern and a win over Chelsea would have been more desirable in the grander scheme of the Premier League title race, perhaps in the Champions League ambitions. But a win over Bayern Munich on Wednesday, which we haven't yet had the chance to talk about, is where we're going to begin because it's the right one to do so. And John, I think it was a performance that maybe surprised people just how comfortable Arsenal were against the German champions.
I thought they were fantastic. I thought it was a very, very even level first half. But I thought the second half, the way that Arsenal upped a gear and basically went through those gears was just phenomenal. That 45 minutes, I thought, marked Arsenal down as potential winners of the competition. I really thought they were exceptional. I must say, I'm going to put this out here, that I do think Declan Rice, I thought that performance, can you think of a better performance from Declan Rice in an Arsenal shirt? It's been 2 and a bit years, and I have to say, he's been phenomenal in a few games, but my word, there was one moment, because it was quite near the benches and relatively near where we sit. He basically just went, he was so pumped up, basically throwing himself about and covering every blade of grass. Went for a tackle in on Harry Kane, knew it would be a crowd pleaser, and basically won it, and basically just turned to the crowd, didn't he, and whipped it up like that. I mean, if ever was a moment for Arsenal fans to worship Declan Rice, that it was that. Yeah. I thought he was great. I thought it was a really good performance. But I do think it also, quite apart from putting Arsenal outright top at the table, it also marked Arsenal down as a real team to fear and to watch in this year's competition. Because I don't really think they went into last year thinking that actually we could do it, we could win it. They went a long way, didn't they? But I do think that basically this year Arsenal will think, wow, learned a few lessons from last year, did really well. Now we've beaten, arguably the other informed team in Europe, and beaten them well and convincingly at the Emirates.
Yeah, it was. I think I used the word, I was fed up of Bayern little broing us.
You notice these things more than I do, but it's a great shout. It's a good shout.
Yeah, because they tweeted when the draw was made, like, hello Arsenal, like when they got us in the draw again, like, oh, we're meeting you again sort of thing. And, I gave in to the unprofessionality of tweeting goodbye when we won the game, which got a little bit of attention online. And I think that, Arsenal would have taken a lot from that game in terms, not obviously, it didn't lead into the Chelsea game in the sense of momentum like maybe we thought it might have. But what we did see was that we saw, I think, Arsenal gain belief against a side of the caliber of Bayern, so that in those latter stages of the Champions League, as they did with Real Madrid last season, is that they can carry that momentum and that hope, that optimism into some really, really important games. So I think that's really, really key for Arsenal. So it kind of raised the expectations in a way for Chelsea. And as I just mentioned, it didn't really have the impact that we thought. And Mikel Arteta, I think, spoke confidently about what was going to happen after that game in Friday's press conference and the buzz that was around the training ground. And we saw the players, of course, ahead of the game against Bayern from the open training session. And it always a feel-good factor around Arsenal. But I don't think any of us really, John, could have predicted the challenge that was. I mean, we could have said how good Chelsea are, but I think that they surprised Arsenal a little, and Arsenal supporters perhaps, as to just how quiet they challenged the Gunners on Sunday.
Yeah, so I obviously in my role I see a lot of teams, and basically I was fortunate enough to cover Chelsea at the Club World Cup in the summer, and obviously saw them then, and I do feel as if I actually wrote about this on Friday, but Maresca doesn't get a great deal of love, I don't think, about the way that he manages, because one thing that he's particularly good at, I think, is setting up teams and devising tactical plans for very specific games. And I must say, I thought that's what he did against Barcelona. I think he rotated the squad well against Burnley, for example, and made sure everyone was sharp. But then also he had a plan against Arsenal. He knew exactly what he was going to do. And I think he's clever like that. I do agree with him. I thought that Chelsea was slightly better, 11v11. And then I think you expected when the Caicedo red card happened that Arsenal would up a gear and really take it to them. But they managed the game well. I think Arteta was right. Basically, it suddenly becomes a very different emotional game when Chelsea take the lead and it's a challenge. Can you claw it back? I do think that Chelsea I'm not sure whether they've got the depth and quality to carry a challenge right until the end. But I do think they should be taken serious as contenders.
Yeah.
And I think that basically to underestimate them, would be a mistake. They've obviously now got to cope without Caicedo for 3 games, which is a real blow for them. But I do, I think Chelsea. The one thing is that I know that Arsenal fans will be thinking, well, as long as they do that against all the other teams, because honestly, their lack of consistency and sometimes their levels can be really high and then drop away. And I think it's finding that consistency that basically takes them forward as a club, I think.
Yeah, I said going into the game that I feel like in seasons gone by where Man City have won titles, this is the type of game that they go into, take a draw, and they're quite happy to then just go on. They've picked up the points, they've kept the gap the same, and they go and pick up the wins they need elsewhere after having already established a lead over their title rivals. But it's difficult to feel that way when obviously you go in at half-time knowing you've got a man advantage. And I think before the game, a draw would have been a good result for Arsenal, but it didn't feel that way at full time because of the opportunity that perhaps had presented it to themselves. And I want to talk about, in a way, that the game was officiated before we get to the red card itself, because there was a lot of cards in this game, particularly for Arsenal. Zubimendi was booked after 5 minutes. We saw Mosquera, Calafiori, Zubimendi all get bookings. Calafiori came off at half-time. Lewis Skelly lasted 9 minutes before he then got a booking as well. And Nkapie got booked in the second half also. Maresca felt that he should have been sent off for his challenge. I don't agree on that sense. I don't think there was enough to claim that to be a red card. But I got the sense, because there was a moment 2 minutes in where Cucurella clattered Saka and stopped Saka from turning on a potential attack. Didn't get booked for that, but then Zubimendi does minutes later. Tell me if I'm wrong, because I often fall into these officiating conspiracy traps. I felt like Taylor lost a little bit of the control of this game quite early on and didn't really gauge the frenetic nature of a London derby between these two very aggressive physical sides. And I think that in the end harmed Arsenal, because they had so many players on a booking that they were unable to commit themselves perhaps as they would have done. And obviously Arteta mentioned after the game that he felt Chelsea's players were targeting his booked players, trying to level the playing field.
Yeah, and look, I actually think that's quite natural, to be honest. Basically, if players are on booking, basically you go for them, don't you? Honestly, it's a familiar script, it's a familiar story on that one. I often defend officials and referees and kind of present the alternative view.
Yeah,
and I don't know that basically Arsenal fans, the other neutrals, will probably say don't be ridiculous. You're probably quite anti-referees, but and someone even pulled me up on basically, my story about sort of kind of, why is Jared Gillett, involved in so many games?
Yeah.
It did seem ridiculous. But look, I do think that on this occasion, I didn't think Anthony Taylor had a good game at all. I basically don't think he managed. I think you're right, Tom, on the basic. I don't think he managed the game particularly well. I think, there was that early challenge. And then it felt to me that he wanted to sort of kind of put a marker down with Zubimendi. So basically to kind of reassert control.
Yeah,
I thought that was quite a soft booking. Honestly, it's such an obvious yellow card when you pull back and stop an opponent from getting away. But it was not quite that. It wasn't quite that, I didn't think, basically. Yeah. But from that moment on, we had 4 yellow cards within the first 28 minutes. And there was a moment just before, I think, the sending off, then basically where he pulled the two together, the two captains, and basically, Saka and James basically effectively said, calm it down, lads. Basically, get hold of your players and sort of kind of, sort of calm it down from the atmosphere that I've created. By the way, that's what I felt, and I basically did feel it was a bit out of control, and maybe there was an element of kind of that playing into Caicedo being so pumped. And basically, that's why he was then sort of kind of so reckless into a challenge with Marino. And I didn't feel that you know, I mean, I have to say the Cucurella one is, you know, he's then got booked. And there was a couple where I was thinking, Cucurella, come on. If you're judging it, then basically on sort of its merits, then I think, you know, the second yellow card might have been, you know, there. I didn't think that the Nkape challenge was a red card in a million years, not in a million years. Because look at it's all about intention on that one. Yes, he's kind of, you know, gone with his elbow, but he's not gone to endanger or hurt the opponent. Absolutely no chance, not for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think obviously you want as a manager to always be in somewhat leaning into your club, and I think Maresca maybe was doing that when he mentioned the Nkapie red card. It frustrated me, I think, because I thought there was the capacity for there to be a really high. I mean, it was an enjoyable game regardless, and it was definitely a great advert, I think, for the Premier League. But I think there was a more of a game there to be had if the sides had been allowed more leash in this particular derby. And I felt as though if Arsenal hadn't have got as many yellows as they did and then didn't have to be as cautious as they kind of were and conscious as they were in the second half, I think they would have been more aggressive, perhaps taking the game more so to them. So I'm looking therefore at the sending off, and I'm thinking, how is he? First of all, the only way I can assume that he doesn't give a red card immediately is that he's had his view obscured. Because I've basically got this theory, John, that since the introduction of VAR, referees kind of lean on it a bit. And maybe 10 years ago, Anthony Taylor gives a straight red card in that situation because he doesn't have the VAR to lean back on to correct him. In my mind, I'd rather VAR was there to... It's not there to re-referee, but it is there to obviously clear those clear and obvious errors. And I think in those situations, I'd like to see a red card given there. And then if it's not a red card, the VAR can show the referee why it's not a red card. Same instance with like a penalty. The threshold for a penalty these days seems to be so high at times for them to be given. And so I'd rather a referee, instead of not making the decision, allowing VAR to see if it was a penalty, give the penalty, because often the threshold on field is so high that VAR won't get involved. Then the VAR can make that decision to recommend maybe looking at overturning a penalty decision being given. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with this one. I'd like to see a red card given on pitch, and I think it should have been, but I feel as though the referees lean on VAR quite heavily these days.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that basically it's one of my pet hates actually about sort of the officials. They kind of, no doubt about it, and then basically they do lean into VAR quite a lot. And the problem, I wouldn't mind that in a way to get the decision right, but the problem you then have is it's not so much about re-refereeing; it's about the clear and obvious mistake territory. Because if they're doing that, then that kind of, you know, defeats the object and puts a hole in that thing where basically it's only supposed to intervene, you know, clear and obvious sort of thing. And the one thing I would say in Taylor's defense on the red and not showing it immediately, because it did make you think, wow, you know, his angle, if you look at it, he was behind it. And so maybe didn't get the clearest views, you know, decent position, but not perfect. And then one thing I would say in defence, where we were sat in the press box at Chelsea, it's always quite amusing. I love sitting near the front there because you really feel, you know, you're on top of the pitch and sort of kind of on top of the sort of the dugouts. Actually, Arsenal's bench didn't, you know, were annoyed clearly at first when the challenge goes in, but they had monitors there, didn't they? Basically on the bench. And it was quite amusing to see, or interesting to see, that basically when Arsenal's bench and sort of kind of, you know, coaching staff and subs saw the tackle on the replay on the monitors, they went absolutely bonkers.
They went mad, yeah.
And rightly so, to be honest. It was a terrible challenge. I love Caicedo. I think he's, you know, I think he's a fantastic player. And basically the best six, I think, you know, of his type, by the way, in the Premier League, because so different to Rice. Those comparisons drove me mad last week. But there you go. That's another subject. But you know, he lost his head, and basically, you know, and unfortunately, you know, he wasn't the best sort of kind of midfielder on the pitch yesterday. He wasn't even Chelsea's best. That was Reece James. And then basically, you know, yeah, it was a bizarre one, and that's really going to hurt Chelsea. It hurt Chelsea in the game, and basically, I thought from that moment on, normally you'd expect the team to win. And honestly, if they'd won Arsenal, even at the death, Maresca would have had every right to be furious with his player because it was reckless, for not just in the challenge, but towards his teammates as well.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And obviously he was frustrated because there was the incident with Bentancur in the Spurs game that wasn't punished, which was very similar. And again, it comes back to that inconsistency between decisions that look very similar. And we've kind of got another situation like that to talk about at the start of the second half. I don't think, and I think you agree with me, that I don't think we maybe took as much into account about the potential offside of Trevor Chalobah's goal until well after the full-time whistle, because it wasn't really a point of discussion during the game. It was kind of, oh, they've scored a corner and the game moved on. It wasn't really a point of contention. But in the wake of the game, it's obviously been highlighted and brought up quite a lot that there's an argument when the corner comes in, the flick from Chalobah over the top of Raya, it's heading into the back kind of side netting, that as he makes contact, Enzo Fernandez is standing in an offside position. And the argument is that he obviously he does make a move towards the ball. He jumps and tries to head the ball. The ball is too high for him. But also he distracts, arguably, Christian Mosquera from making more of an effort to block the ball. I won't give you my opinion. I'm going to let you go for this, and then I'll see where we both stand.
So I did see that last night. And you're right. I think it was it brought up a bit more of a social media thing, wasn't it? Because I must say, 9 times out of 10, it's never an issue from a corner on an offside because you can't be offside from a corner. Just think about it. You can't be, in front of the ball, can you? So it's obvious. But, obviously the secondary motion means then that basically if you are standing in an offside position when the ball is touched, then of course you can be. And that is the issue. At the time, didn't see it. Didn't take too much notice of it at all, and therefore didn't really inquire. But someone did, point me in the direction last night of it, and I did sort of kind of look on social media, and I was quite surprised to see absolutely social media was rife with it, basically. And then so I did check first thing this morning just to sort of say, was that checked? And basically, I can absolutely guarantee that was checked. And basically, it doesn't always have to be flashed up on the screen, but those things are looked at. I checked with someone in the VAR control room, and basically, it was checked, and it was cleared. So it was cleared from a perspective that basically Fernandez, they felt, did not interfere with Mosquera's ability to play the ball or kind of clear, if you like. So you definitely, if he was on top of him and completely blocked him off, then you're getting into that sphere. I'm a little bit 50-50 on it, because I don't want to kind of get into the sort of kind of the realms of always sort of kind of defending that, position, because I think it's so obvious that Arsenal benefited from when Eze scored through a crowd of players, through offside, and sort of kind of deemed not interfering with Vicario. So you have to, challenge and balance everything on its own rights. I think it would have been unquestionably offside if Mosquera could have played the ball easily, but was then blocked off by Fernandez. And I don't know what you thought, Tom, that basically I'm not sure that was the case entirely.
So
that was my rule of thumb.
I've written my referee review, which has gone out, will be out by the time this is published, which we do every week, and there's like some big contentious decisions on FL. And I said in that I think there is an argument for there to be a potential offside there. However, I think Mosquera doesn't do enough in that situation for me to go, yeah, he's clearly being impeded. Like, he's not really... He's kind of more focused on Enzo. Like, he's kind of like got his arms around him, and he's not like looking towards the ball coming in to kind of go and clear it. He's more focused on what Enzo's doing. And I think that's what probably sees the referees go, well, I don't think there's enough in this to think that Mosquera is going to get the ball if Fernandez does this action or what. Ultimately, he has absolutely no bearing, therefore, on kind of Mosquera's ability to not win the header, because Mosquera doesn't even go up to try and win a header. He's more focused on trying to, wrestle with Enzo, who, yes, is an offside position. I know that I can hear people listening to this going, well, surely that means he's being affected by the player who is in an offside position. But I still think it's more about the fact that he has to try and prevent the ball. Whereas in situations as we saw with the Eze goal against Spurs, the goalkeeper Vicario has a clear line of sight to the shot. Trossard does not make any movement towards the ball at all, even though he's standing in offside position. I think that should be a goal. I think with the Van Dijk situation with Robertson against Manchester City, the difficulty with that one is that I think that Robertson obviously makes an action because he ducks underneath the ball. And that, in a way, is obviously going to affect how the goalkeeper is assessing that situation to make his own decisions. But for me, I'd rather in these situations that goals were given, to be honest. I think that the threshold, it seems, and the reason why some of these goals, like the Robertson one being ruled out, but this one and the Eze one weren't, it just seems such a blur between these different examples, and yet we're getting totally different outcomes from the decision-making process. And that's, I think, the frustration for fans in these scenarios.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do agree with that. I think that I think there's a couple there, isn't there, that have been really tested of late. The handball law and basically the difference between the Premier League and the Champions League is really interesting. And basically, you're playing with fire, basically in the Champions League. I think every decision is going to be given, and basically, but I don't know if it's absolutely crystal clear in the Premier League either. And then also, the offside lately, got to look at that basically, because it's so subjective, and that doesn't quite feel right. Yeah. I'd sort of kind of have a bit of sympathy with Liverpool in the basic. 1 week, they've got Van Dijk being disallowed at City. And then the next week, the goal stands in a similar situation home to Forest. Well,
madness.
That got lost, because basically they were so well beaten by Forest that basically it almost became an irrelevance. But basically, if it had some way dramatically affected the result, then, them being just another goal, then I think that basically we wouldn't have heard the end of it. And rightly so, basically, because I do feel as if there needs to be a bit more clarity on those two things, really. Sort of very much the kind of the handball, which is a big, thorny subject, basically. And also, much more pertinently, it feels of late, is that interference and, going to play on offside. Because even here now, nearly 24 hours later, we're talking about the decision. We're not quite sure, are we? We're not quite sure. Even though we sort of kind of probably think they've got it right, there's still a bit of an argument there that basically, so, and what would have happened if the linesman had put his flag up and the referee had disallowed it? I kind of think that they wouldn't then have overturned that decision because, again, it becomes subjective.
Yeah. It is obviously so frustrating that it feels like every single week after a big game, we spend so much talking about big decisions rather than the football that was played. But it was, again, one of the games that was dominated by those choices. I think the right decision was given. And I always try and put my shoes on the other foot and be like, if it was an Arsenal goal that was being ruled out for that, I'd feel incredibly hard done by if Arsenal saw a goal ruled out. Yes,
I agree. I think that's a very fair way of looking at it. I must say, I don't think Anthony Taylor as a referee is as good as he was. I don't know why that is. That basically, because he was definitely up there with Michael Oliver. Well, they're still seen as the two, basically as the two best ones. I think Michael Oliver still remains good. I like Rob Jones, basically. I think he's quite a big sort of powerful and demonstrative, and basically sort of kind of definitive. But this season, even he's basically been caught up with something, isn't he? I think it was Chelsea Fulham, but basically, it was just, so I think it's a thankless task, really. But I do think ultimately there's not too much to complain about.
No, and I don't think there really was after that goal was scored, and the focus kind of returned more so to the football after that point. Besides the Hincapié situation, which we've kind of touched upon, that Maresca disagreed with, but I think most of us would agree that it wasn't a red card. Arsenal responded pretty quickly, and in a fashion that I think we would have liked to have seen, considering Chelsea take the lead with a fewer personnel on the field. Saka I didn't feel like the best of overall games in terms of his performances. There was a shot he had in the first half, which I think he should have done better with, that he tested kind of the left boot of Sanchez. There was a couple of times he kind of got into his natural position and then blazed his kind of shots over the bar rather than getting them on target. But in those moments, he can pull out an amazing ball, which proves to be a defining moment in a game. And he did it once again. And obviously, once again, it is Mikel Merino, again, in a big game, delivering, being in the right place at the right... That's if people ask, what is he really good at, Merino? He's good at being in the right place at the right time. And he continues to be that. And when he is in there, he tends to finish his opportunities as well. So your thoughts on the goal and Saka and Merino's performances overall as well?
I think it's a great shout. I think that basically, I love Saka. I think Saka.
You've said that before.
Saka, I think he's brilliant as a personality, as a sort of a leader, as a as an Arsenal. There's an Arsenal legend in the making, probably. Well on his way, if not the way. Fabulous player, but you're right. I don't think he had his best game. But yeah, when he needs to, that little jink down the right, the cut back inside, and that cross, it's his trademark. It's brilliant, and he delivers. I do think he should have done better with that shot on with Sanchez that you talk about, absolutely. But he's just so good at that Saka, that little trademark move, brilliant. And Merino, I must say, he's one that is just at a moment. By the way, you blew my mind with a stat.
Oh yeah,
it was Saka's first Premier League assist.
Yeah, that was our friend Sam Blitz at Sky. Yeah, he told me, and I passed it to you. Yeah.
Amazing. I just thought that was astonishing. First one in 365 days in Premier League.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, he missed a fair chunk through injury.
Yes,
but he just seems so consistent and reliable that basically, of course, and I was thinking, no, that can't be right. It must be from open play or something, because his delivery on corners and stuff like that. But and he's just, he's such a good player. But anyway, but then sort of Merino does crop up with. So we were talking about it before the game, weren't we? Basically, saying about Merino and his sort of kind of presence on the pitch, because he definitely doesn't lead from the front. He's a different player, and that's nothing against him. He's not a centre forward, but basically, he does play the sort of the false nine, if you like, well.
Yeah. And
basically, but he is such a moments player, because he scored in that game at Newcastle. He scored when Arsenal turned it around. He scored the equaliser at Chelsea. He is a brilliant squad player, a brilliant leader, a great personality. I think he's in the leadership group, isn't he? And basically sort of kind of really leads by example. And basically, what a character to have, because he can play midfield, he can play different positions in midfield, he does a job up front. I don't think by any means he's sort of ideal, and I think sometimes people sort of over-egg him a little bit too much up front, because he doesn't offer the same press as a Gorkrez or a natural striker. But that's not his fault. But I do think he is a player that you can rely on so much. There was another one, wasn't there, where if he'd sorted out his feet a little bit easier, then basically it was still forced a good save for a shot from the edge of the box.
Where Gyökeres then slid in afterwards. Yeah.
But honestly, in terms of signings, when you consider the big money spent, brilliant value.
30 million.
Honestly, it's not just what he did yesterday, but what he does as a personality. Brilliant, I think. Great character and sort of kind of leader to have in this squad. Really, really top.
Yeah, he continues to deliver. I think that this was the game where his presence as Arsenal's, I say centre forward, it's always in inverted quotation marks when you say it, suited Chelsea quite a lot, because I think that they were able to build out from the back with a lot more confidence than had, say, Victor Gyökeres been playing off the last man and sitting on that player all game, ready for a ball in behind, ready for a ball over the top, whatever. Whereas Merino effectively wasn't a centre forward, other than when we got into those positions like Saka was, where he can run into the box. He basically played midfield throughout the game. And I think that took the pressure off the Chelsea backline, whereas before, Ezra's not typically the most impressive presser off the ball. He tends to do his best work, when Arsenal are in possession. Ødegaard, on the other hand, is a great presser, when out of possession, and loves to force the back line, especially when he works in tandem with another centre forward like a Gyökeres, who is also going to press the back line. So I felt that those two lacking really did help Chelsea in terms of their build-up and confidence, even when they went down to 10 men, because it felt like Arsenal still lacked a natural kind of centre-forward figure while Gyökeres and Jesus weren't there. They both were in the squad, and Gyökeres eventually came on. I thought the player that changed the game the most for Arsenal when he came off the bench was Martin Ødegaard for me. I felt Arsenal took a lot more stable control of the game when Ødegaard was present. He didn't do anything like, well, you pinpoint into this moment or that moment. It was more of a subtle, I think, shift of momentum, and Arsenal regained a bit of composure with him in the team. And had maybe Zubimendi not been on a yellow card, I think that maybe we would have seen Eze and Odegaard on the pitch together a lot longer than we did. But I think because of Martins and Mendy on a yellow, he felt that moving Merino back into midfield for Gyökeres coming on, or Eze coming off and Gyökeres coming on was the right play. And I do tend to agree. I just think that had Zubi maybe not been on a yellow, we probably would have seen a different type of midfield selection, and Merino probably coming off for Gyökeres instead. But Arsenal had a chance right at the end of the game, and it's funny because I saw and I completely forgot about this, but this game last season in the 2-2, again, right at the end of the game, Arsenal had a really big chance, aerial crossed, and they just didn't quite get it quite right, that they didn't take. And it's fast forward another season, and we're in the same situation, cross on the left-hand side. Gyökeres is there waiting to head this ball into the back of the net, and Timbers just thought, doesn't care, I'm running in, I need to get on the end of this, and just ends up flicking it over Gyökeres. So agonising end to the game for Arsenal.
It really was, yeah. I must say, at the time, from where we were sat, I thought a defender had cleared it. It was that heroic. Basically, because it's, you're quite low down, you're looking at it and think, oh my days. And basically, then obviously you think, blimey, Timber couldn't quite direct it on target. But then you actually later see where Gyökeres is stood. Surely he scores from there. And basically, what an opportunity, because that's what Gyökeres is all about, basically, penalty box finisher. And basically, what an opportunity. It was good to see Gyökeres back. I thought Gyökeres came on and looked really sharp.
Yes.
I did think also Odegaard looked sharp. I liked him. I didn't think clearly would want to do more, have more impact on the game. But just from a sort of kind of a sharpness and physicality point of view, I thought that Odegaard was at it. And basically quick, nimble, and basically really, quite. There was no sort of kind of rustiness there, for example. Yes, things didn't perhaps come off for him, but I thought that basically if you are looking to make changes against Brentford, there was enough there to make you suddenly think, yeah, okay, Eze, who's played a lot of football, basically, and probably looked as fatigued and tired as anyone on the pitch. He's had, what a week, he's had, by the way. And then basically, maybe it's a chance to give him a breather and then basically bring Odegaard back in, bring Gyökeres back in, and sort of kind of then all of a sudden you're talking about, quality in reserve stepping up, but then being able to kind of really, in sort of kind of bring in new, fresh legs and basically give the team a bit of a lift, just 3 days later.
I think you're absolutely spot on. I think that where Arsenal go from here in terms of the players coming back, the games they've got coming, how thick and fast it's going to be over the festive period, and how Arteta deals with that returning group is obviously going to be, I think, the defining kind of period of Arsenal's season, because having those players back, particularly the centre-forward options, and where Arsenal's team evolves from this point, it will tell us everything about how capable they are going to be in the second half of the campaign to go on and potentially win the title for the first time in 21 years. So I think, or 22 years, I think that the biggest thing we haven't spoken about, which mattered from the off, and I mentioned this to Arteta post-match, and he seemed to enjoy the statistic as well, is that there's only 2 games in 3 years, 3 months, and 25 days that he has not been able to call upon for a Premier League game, either of Saliba or Gabriel. And I think that was a really, there was such a clear lack of presence of both of them in this game, or just one of them, because I felt Arsenal lacked their understanding, know-how, composure, experience in the way that they built from the back at times. And Hincapié and Mosquera, while I was okay with their performances, there was obviously a clear gap for me in just seeing how both of the starting pair operate compared to the number 2s.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, that question and seeing it replayed this morning, basically, I don't know why, but from the back of my mind, basically, it suddenly made me think of Sinead O'Connor, And basically, I was thinking, you remember the line? It's been 15 days or 16 hours, minutes or whatever, basically, since you've been gone. And I just thought, nothing compares to you. But nothing compares to Saliba and Gabriel. And basically, the one thing is, I would say, I think either one of those players with Saliba or Gabriel would look great. And basically, no issue there whatsoever. And I must say, I've already become a huge fan of Hincapié. I think what a little warrior. And basically, But he did give away that free kick, needless free kick, really, which kind of led to the original chance for Pedro. And then obviously then the corner follows and then the goal. And basically, when you are talking about small details, and Arteta is such a perfectionist, I bet he's into him about that. But basically, he is a little worry. He's quick, he's strong, he loves a challenge. And quality player. Mosquera, he's all equally very good. But then basically the thing with Saliba, he just looks so confident and composed on the ball. And Mosquera is just different, isn't he? And basically, but
he's 21.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And basically, but sometimes he looks, busy and sort of kind of, a little bit not panicky, but then basically, sort of not quite as composed and stuff. He probably is, but it's just a different physical style. So, I think individually, I think to come through that game, when you put all things together, I think on balance, it's been a really good week and it was a good result and it's not the end of the world, but it's just that 10-man element for an hour, including added time, basically. That's the frustration, really.
That is the frustration, 100%. And, I think for both teams, they will see it as a huge missed opportunity, both of them, because there's arguments for both. Are Chelsea going to get a better opportunity than playing against a Saliba and Gabriel less Arsenal without a centre forwards, off the back of two huge games against Spurs and Bayern, tired to beat Arsenal when they're in a really good phase? It's difficult to see that happening in the near future, and Arsenal being maybe as slightly vulnerable as they looked on the day at times. So there's a missed opportunity there. And then for Arsenal to be given kind of the emphasis to take the game to Chelsea, a man up in the second half, and then to not do that effectively as we would have hoped, again, another missed opportunity. But I think I agree with you 100%. This week has been huge for Arsenal. 2 wins and a draw. If you'd have looked at those 3 games and said, I'll offer you 2 wins and a draw, you don't know which games they're going to be in, but that's your offering. I think most would be very happy to think that's what they got out of it. Last thing I will say on this before we look ahead is that you might remember in last week's episode, I had one nitpick from the North London derby, and that was that I said that I wanted to see when Eza scored in that 4th goal, Arteta ring the changes and rest a load of players for the Bayern game and obviously for this. I felt as though not using all the there was an unused substitute against Spurs as well, not being proactive enough in resting players may have led subsequently to the tiredness that I think we may have seen on Sunday. And I just hope that with these players coming back, as we've mentioned, John, that we do see him maybe in moments where Arsenal are 3-4 goals up in a certain game, fingers crossed they get to that stage, that he does ring the changes a lot more and rest players a lot more.
I completely agree with you. And fun enough, completely unrelated, I promise, copyright. Basically, I actually wrote a bit of an opinion piece, which hopefully look out for, basically. But Arsenal signed all these players in the summer, and frankly, you've got to trust, dare I say it, the process, but you've got to trust those players and the quality and the depth, because you've got to rest and rotate. And I can almost hear the kind of people say, for example, the unthinkable happens and he kind of leaves out Declan Rice or something like that against Brentford. But there's no point in having a squad, which everyone says is as deep as it is, unless you trust the depth within that squad to do a job when needed. And basically, whether that means, Norgard in for Zubimendi or, playing a slightly different way, or, whatever it might be. Nweri, who I think is, a beautiful player, a wonderful player. But he must be thinking, where am I going to get some minutes? Because they persuaded him to stay in the summer.
Exactly.
There was certainly no guarantee, but they persuaded him to stay. He's not going to stay if he thinks he's not going to get any action. And basically, sure enough, he's hardly had a look in. And you've got, if you invest in that squad, then you've got to see it out. I feel a bit sorry for Miles Lewis-Skelly right now because, I thought he looked a little bit shaky defensively against Bayern. He didn't have a great game at Chelsea, to be honest. And basically that's come from, I think, a player who's a little bit rusty, not had as many minutes as last season, definitely needs to get into a rhythm. And therefore, but if he feels he's not getting that much of a chance, he probably takes a few risks to sort of kind of stand out and do things.
Yeah.
And I think that's natural for a kid, but I also think it's hard for him at the moment. And so it's got to go down as basically, Arsenal need to rest and rotate. They'll definitely do that in the Carabao Cup. they might do that in the Champions League. But there'll be games. Look at this week. It's Brentford on the Wednesday night, Villa on Saturday lunchtime. I think it's criminal. I really do. I think it's mad.
Yeah.
I think it's just the same for Villa. They're away to.
Yes, it is a joke for both teams.
Yeah. So basically, I'm not saying Arsenal have got it harder by no means.
No.
I think I don't think it's right. But I actually think Villa have got it harder because they're away from home at Brighton.
South Coast, yeah.
I mean, come on. It can't be right. I was surprised because, TNT certainly have a rule for away games in the Champions League. Well, so, just to be sort of devil's advocate here, but basically imagine Villa were playing in sort of kind of northern France, Lens, for example, basically. Well, they'd probably get a flight home and be home quicker.
Yeah, potentially.
They probably can't fly home from, I don't know, but from Brighton to Birmingham. But didn't sit right with me that. It doesn't. We're talking about protecting players and fatigue and whatever. But anyway, back to the original point, which was definitely the squad depth. And you definitely got to kind of ring those changes. Got to be, Saliba's injured in training, and they've only got 4 out at the moment. Sort of 2 centre halves, Trossard and
Gabriel.
Yeah. And so basically, it was just a little bit of a concern that Kai Havertz is the one that I was thinking. And basically, it just feels as if, and they're mid-table in the injury league, by the way, but they're basically that will soon change unless Arteta rests and rotates, and it's going to be difficult. Arteta, I always feel, is a player that doesn't particularly trust young players and squad players, and he would be furious at that very notion because basically he has championed young players and done that very well. But I do think he knows what he likes and he trusts his players. And even last season when Saka got that hamstring, he played too many games. There's no doubt about it because he's brilliant, but he should have been rested. And if that impacts ever so slightly, then I'm sorry, but it's
down to him.
That's the balance.
Against Brentford, and we'll move on to Brentford now. Obviously we have our flashback section, which we're going to do for both of these games. Now I'll come on to. I've got Brentford and John's got Villa, so I'll talk about my flashback Brentford game in a second. Just sticking in the current times, I would like to see several changes to that 11, and I would rest Declan Rice this week. I think I'd look to potentially play Zubi in the 6 and then use the 2 10 roles that we saw. If he wants to start Eza, then feel free. Obviously, Eza started the last 3 games, but you could play, as you say, Waneri and Ødegaard together in those 2 10s potentially. You have to find a little bit of balance there, but I think you could do that. Madueke for Saka, I think, is a change you could comfortably make. Saka didn't have his best game against Chelsea. Madueke plays a lot better on that right-hand side, and he's of a level and a quality and a fitness level now, having played the last 2 games and came off the bench against Spurs as well. I think that he absolutely could start over Saka on Wednesday night against Brentford. Martinelli, we think, needs to build out that fitness. Gyökeres, I think, having come off the bench, maybe could start this game as well on Wednesday night. And then against Villa, you can make those changes again and bring those regular starters back into 11. You could rest Calafiori, you could rest even Jury and Timber, for Ben White, and give Ben White an opportunity to play on Wednesday. It's a lot of changes that are potential, and Arteta doesn't like making huge turnovers, especially for league games. But with the schedule, as we've just discussed, and it being that late Wednesday game and then an early Saturday game away at Villa, I just think if I see the same team that started against Chelsea start against Brentford, other than maybe one, I will be disappointed, I think, in a lack of rotation and in an opportunity. Obviously, Club Brugge is coming up, and then I think they've got a midweek of games off completely. So there is an opportunity to rest there. But I think with Villa away so close and that being such a challenging test, and they're in such a good vein of form, that we need to kind of set up for that. But yes, my flashback game is the Brentford game from just a couple of years ago. You'll painfully remember Arsenal, of course, drawing 1-1 against Brentford in the week before they were set to go to Manchester City to face their, at that time, main title rivals, of course, who would go on to win it. And unfortunately, in that 22-23 season, Arsenal had a lead at this stage and had the chance to extend that lead with a win at home against Brentford. But this was kind of the game where the wheels began to creak a little bit and Arsenal's title challenge began to falter. And City had been so relentless since they'd drawn that game at Nottingham Forest. And that same day, Arsenal had won at Aston Villa with that famous Emi Martinez back of his head, Jorginho shot from range. But they didn't drop a single point until they won the title, City, after that game. But Arsenal continued to kind of falter and the gap kept closing and closing. But also in this game, and John knows I love a referee conspiracy, was the infamous Lee Mason VAR mistake that saw Brentford score a goal that should have been ruled out for offside by VAR. So it's kind of a poetic juxtaposition, at least I hope, from what we'll see this midweek, when I hope Arsenal completely take the game away from the officials in any way, shape or form. And while having a lead already established, can, of course, take the advantage and move to. So, John, just some quick thoughts on this Wednesday game against Brentford, what you've made of Brentford, of course, this season, and how you rate Arsenal's chances.
Oh, look, it's a game that Arsenal have to win, basically. You know, I'm at Fulham Man City on Tuesday night, and Man City can close the gap and put a bit of pressure on, you know, reduce it to, 2 points with a win at Craven Cottage. And, suddenly you begin to feel a little bit of pressure, basically. And so that'll be interesting how Arsenal deal with that. And because there's no doubt about it, I do think there'll be twists and turns in the title race. Arsenal would want to stay ahead. Liverpool stayed, felt, all season last year, they basically stayed ahead. And then basically, Arsenal would certainly want to ride out that pressure. But I think Brentford are difficult. Brentford are difficult opponents. And I think, they've surprised a few people, including myself, just how good they've been this season. And basically in terms of kind of results and performances,
They started off poor, didn't they? And then
they
really resurged.
They struggled a bit. And basically, they've had dips without a shadow of a doubt. But basically, obviously, it's... Tudor basically sort of kind of up front, and they basically scoring goals and basically done well. And I do think Arsenal struggled a bit at the Emirates against Brentford, haven't they?
Yeah.
It's been a difficult spell.
The last 2 seasons, I think. 2 of the last 3 seasons, I think they've drawn it.
Wow. And so, they are difficult opponents. I think Keith Andrews has basically built a team very, very much in the mould of what's gone before. Very much a moments team. Dangerous team, basic moments team, set pieces, strong defensively, tactically astute. But if you want to win titles, you got to win this game, and it is an opportunity, for Arsenal basically. In that Brentford have got an extra day rest, which I think is significant now when it comes into it. But Arsenal have absolutely got... I completely agree with you. They've got to make changes. They've got to make this sort of kind of freshness count. But as I say, if you are talking then suddenly about bringing back Odegaard and Gyökeres into that starting lineup, just for example, it's not just freshness, but it gives everyone a stadium and lift and basically go, wow, the big boys are back. And basically, subconsciously, I think it's great that basically all of a sudden those sort of kind of players can give you a lift and kind of change the mood a bit and sort of kind of really lift it, So I do think that it's a big opportunity.
Massive. Yeah, just some of Brentford's results this season. They've beaten Aston Villa at home. They've drawn with Chelsea. They've actually beaten Aston Villa twice this season because they knocked them out of the Cup as well in the third round of the EFL Cup. They beat Manchester United at home. They've beaten Liverpool at home. They've beaten Newcastle at home. It has been away from home where they've had a few more struggles, most recently losing at Brighton, losing at Crystal Palace. They did manage a win over West Ham, but I mean, join the club in that kind of phase. Who isn't doing that at the moment? They did lose at Fulham as well earlier on in the campaign in that West London derby, and lost at Sunderland. So their away record is much poorer than their home record. So obviously that will hopefully suit Arsenal in a way on Wednesday, and then will be an interesting kind of reverse fixture in the second half of the season for Arsenal. But yeah, it's one that we expect Arsenal to win, but will not be a walkover by any shape or form. Aston Villa is on Saturday, less than 3 whole days after that game against Brentford. 2 days of recovery and then an early kickoff Saturday afternoon, of which we'll be getting an early train up to Birmingham for that one. But talk to me about what it is about Villa Park that stood in your mind and memory that first came to the fore when this fixture came up.
Well, I got such a nice kind of reaction actually from my memory of 1987 that I thought I'd delve back into the memory bank and go back a few years. And basically go back to January 1986, when I me and a couple of pals basically went up to Villa Park. It was a League Cup. I think it was a quarter-final, basically, and it was a midweek game. And Charlie Nicholas was doing a very rare thing at that time. He was in a rich vein of scoring form. I mean, what happened there? I really don't know. And basically, but anyway, I'll come on to how it finished. But basically, but the thing that still lives long in my memory is basically, I hope my mum's not listening, but basically I did bunk off school, and basically me and a couple of pals basically we got the train up, and basically I think probably got a supporter special back in the day, and basically sort of kind of went up there, and I just walked into Villa Park and I looked up at these things called executive boxes. And this thing was crazy. It was like, Villa Park was state of the art then. Absolutely fabulous. This looked a magnificent stadium. Brilliant midweek atmosphere under the lights. Brilliant, sort of kind of noise. And I'll always remember Aretha Franklin, Who's Zooming Who, was playing over the massive PA and speaker system. I thought this is blowing my mind, basically. This is what the future looks like, future stadiums and stuff. And it was just amazing, just remember weird things you remember what song was playing and that sort of stuff, really. And basically it was great. Arsenal were in a good run of form at that time, and thought, blimey, they couldn't win something this year, could they? They couldn't actually do something this year, could they? Well, in answer to your question, no, they couldn't.
Yeah.
And so basically, I do think from memory, Charlie Nicholas scored, and basically it was cancelled out. Went to a replay, they lost the replay, another season gone. And I do think I always remember the way it panned out, which was basically, look it up. I'm sure this is right, but basically they had sort of back-to-back games against Watford, like literally day after next. And basically, I think Don Howe basically was dispensed of. And then there's this kind of pathway, sort of kind of led into George Graham getting the job. I don't think George Graham was first choice, basically. I think Terry Venables was.
Yeah.
But then basically George...
Yeah, you're right. They played Watford back-to-back. They lost
to Spurs. That's crazy, isn't it?
They lost to Spurs away, then lost at home to Watford, and then lost away to Watford only 2 days later, 31st of March. And hold on, 1 day later.
Yeah, no, it was back-to-back days.
Yeah, 31st of March 1986, Arsenal lose 2-0 to Watford. 1st of April 1986, Arsenal lose 3-0 away to Watford.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Absolutely mental.
You've been fuming about a 3-day break between
Villa and never mind
that.
I felt fatigued, basically going, and I went to both games. And honestly, it was remarkable. I'm still pally with a member of that Watford team, and basically who played, and it always brings it up from time to time, because I think Arsenal, I mean, it was just Arsenal seemed to have a bit of a bogey time at that time against Watford, but but the Villa Park one was. It was just, it promised so much, and thought, here we go. And so, I hope that's not an omen. But basically, it was just an amazing sort of memories, really. And also, I just think back in those days that you could get to an away game and basically get home again. And that was the beauty of kind of, then back in those days when actually, trains and, I was about to say planes, trains and automobiles, but basically it was kind of travel was laid on for supporters. And basically now I look at it and basically clubs just don't go there, kind of, organisations don't go there. So much of kind of what supporters face would be cleared up by actually chartered trains and basically about midweek games and basically getting to and from. Because back in the day, you could definitely get away, get home from an away game, wherever it might be in the country, because they thought about fans. How that has been allowed to kind of escape is an actual, is a shocking stain on the modern game. It really is.
There was, for the United game, in the first game of this season, Arsenal tried to schedule a chartered train and there was not enough uptake. And so it got cancelled. It wasn't an evening game. It was a, mid-afternoon game on the Sunday, I think it was. It's not long ago. My memory's still fading me. But I think that for those evening games, you're absolutely right. And I think you would get the uptake in particular for those games. Like we think about the rearranged Everton game that's coming up in December that was initially a Sunday afternoon game that's now a Saturday 8 p.m. kickoff for fans that have got to get back from Liverpool afterwards. I mean, I'm going up and staying overnight for that game because I cannot get home. after that trip now. So it's something, again, that always continues to feed the narrative around where fans fit in the sport of football these days, because supporters just feel so secondary,
they're almost in irrelevance. They're basically they are absolutely, they are embraced and lauded and heralded basically because they create the atmosphere which makes the Premier League so special. But actually, when it comes to actually looking after them and the lifeblood of the game, the supporter, basically, they're forgotten about. It honestly, it drives me insane. And basically, I always, listen and sort of kind of hopefully engage with supporters on the issue, because I think it's a scandal. As someone who used to, spend a lot of money and a lot of hours going to games. I did go as a fan, believe it or not. And basically, I'd go to random games as well, and basically go all over. And basically, the way that fans get treated, I actually think go back 40 years, and fans were treated far better. I really do, than they are now, because they're disregarded when it comes to kind of, schedules and kickoffs and transport. Listen, TV pays the bills. I do not.
Back then, it was the gate receipts.
Absolutely. So. And then no one can escape from that. Basically, they pay the bills. Basically, so let's not be silly about this and blame TV companies, because honestly, they want to show the best games, and there's a lot of people at home want to see the best games. It's not about that. It's about the kind of the Premier League ensuring that basically fans are catered for and looked after. It's so simple that basically lay on the trains, it'll be fine.
I mean, just look at how bad the atmospheres were during lockdown. The games without fans are horrible to watch. Horrible occasions where there's no atmosphere in a stadium, and so and fans do have power. To be fair, fans, the fan power is greater than people think. We've seen that recently at Arsenal regarding certain sponsorships, I think recently as well. So fan power is definitely something to take into account here, and hopefully we try and echo those voices as much as possible.
Yeah, that's a great shout out, Tom. They're basically, about the sponsorship. Clearly, the sort of kind of club have listened and basically sort of kind of thought about it, and I think that's good.
It is good. So the fast forward into 2025, John, getting in the TARDIS and going this far ahead. I think that this is, the form that Villa have been in obviously has been very impressive. They started the season so horrendously that it really looked like it could even be Unai Emery suddenly being amongst those managers being considered first to leave. But it has been a massive turnaround for them, and they have been the team that have basically been the knife in the back of Arsenal's title challenges, particularly at the Emirates, of course, less so at Villa Park. They won there last season. Obviously, I spoke of that result they got 3 seasons ago as well, but it was the 23-4 season where there wasn't a particularly enjoyable result there. And they've now resurged and look in good form again. They too, like Arsenal, have very little time to recover from their midweek game at Brighton, which you could argue is definitely worse than what Arsenal are dealing with playing at home against Brentford. But how do you see this one going for Arsenal? And do you see them finally kind of put into the sword this Aston Villa hoodoo?
No, not really. But I
thank you for listening this week to the podcast.
I think it'll be a draw. And I think in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that's a bad result. Villa have beaten Man City this season at Villa Park. Their record under Emery at home is phenomenal and basically very hard to beat. It's a lively atmosphere. It's a good atmosphere. I think it'll be a test for both sides. And basically, if Arsenal could get away from there with a draw, I actually think that's a decent result, because you can't win every game. And basically, almost it feels like you have to, not target certain games, but basically, just make sure that you're constantly evolving and improving on results from last season. And I think in the grand scheme of things, if Arsenal can kind of escape from there with a draw, very hard place to go, then I actually think, taken into context, it wouldn't, Chelsea was disappointed because they had to play a team, with 10 men for, an hour. So that's the disappointment, and they weren't at their best. But if you basically come away from there doing yourselves justice with a draw, then I actually think, I don't think that's, anything to be sniffed at.
I think it's well explained. I'll still come away gutted. There's no doubt about that. I'll still come away if Arsenal don't win their gut. And I think that the rhetoric that's followed the Chelsea result in particular has been it's been a lot of emotion following that game. I think obviously, as you rightly point out, the context of being against 10 men for 60 minutes or whatever it was, changes how we feel and respond to that game. Villa is a very difficult place to go. If Arsenal come away there with a win, it's huge. If they come away from there, like similar to St James's Park earlier in the season, when they came away from that game with a win, it really felt like, wow, Arsenal are something this season. If they do that at Villa as well, I think, again, it'd be a massive, massive statement sent out to the league as well, especially if they can follow it or rather precede it with a victory over Brentford on Wednesday. But the players coming back, Gabriel Jesus could get some first minutes back on Wednesday night against Brentford. We could see Victor Gyökeres re-establishing himself in the starting 11 for the centre forward position. Hopefully we get an update from Arteta in the press conferences this week about William Saliba that's not too bad. He's set to have a scan as we record this today, and hopefully that will be quite positive. But John, it's been an absolute pleasure as always to speak with you. I'm going to be mean as per and ask for a prediction, but I'm going to try and guess your prediction because I think you're going with win over Brentford and draw against Villa.
Yeah. I'm slightly wary of Brentford. I think Brentford are a dangerous team. Don't take them lightly. But yeah, I'm the merchant of doom. Sorry.
Well, the other way it works.
You're going back-to-back wins, aren't you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think you predicted draw against Spurs and draw against Bayern as well. We won both of those. So
yeah.
Maybe reverse psychology is a thing, but I'm going, 100%. I'm going for a win in both because I like to manifest optimism in any way, shape, or form that I can. But John, pleasure to speak as always. Tell people what you've got coming up, what you've got out, and what they should be checking out content-wise.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm very much looking at a sort of kind of the injury aspect and basically, how on earth, Arsenal get through this difficult spell. So have a look out for that because I do think the squad demands to be used, frankly. And then later in the week, I'm off to Washington actually for the World Cup draw. So it'll be interesting to see see how that pans out. So England's route to the finals next summer.
So are you back next Monday? Or are you still out there?
Yes. Yeah. No, yes. Yeah, blimey.
That's a quick turnaround then. Fly over the pond and back straight away. Wow.
I'm back on Saturday morning, pal.
My word. That's commitment, that is.
And then
I've got, obviously, just mentioned earlier in the show, that referee review from the Chelsea game. You can go and watch where it breaks down kind of the big decisions, a bit of an analysis around Anthony Taylor's performance in the game and the concerns there. We have, obviously, coverage of Mikel Arteta's press conference tomorrow ahead of the game against Brentford. And all of the coverage around that game will be available on FL and, of course, on the Mirror as well. So make sure to go and check that out. And also, there's some comments from Eberechi Eze following the game against Chelsea to go and give a read to, also coming out in the near future across platforms. So go and check that out too. Thank you all your listeners for tuning in. Appreciate your time, or watchers, wherever you happen to be tuning in from, either on YouTube or on all the usual audio platforms. And we're back for you, as we rightly point out, next Monday. Thank you, John, for your time. Appreciate it.
Pleasure
as always. Speak to you soon. And as always, keep seeing red.